Do we actually really need the microphone?
You don't. A lot of people like having a microphone.
Well, I like having one. Anyway. Go to the door. Well, I've actually forgotten what I agreed to say here tonight, so I have to very quickly write some notes. Although, to be honest, I don't really need to write notes to talk about Dawkins, because I think it's kind of one anyway, and I don't think you need to say that much. Basically, when I discovered Richard Dawkins was about 8 years ago. He wrote a book called Reading the Rainbow. I know that some of us have heard this before. But he came and did a signing at the Conference Auditorium. And I'd heard of Richard Dawkins before, but I've never read any of his books, and I went down and that. And this book was a bit different because I'd only had this reputation for writing books about evolutionary biology. And this one was a bit different because he's been accused over the years of taking the wonder and the majesty out of the world and nature by explaining it all the way scientifically. And this book was his answer to that. And I went along and got it signed and took it away with me a while later. I read it, and it was a fantastic book. And after that, I started reading some of his books. And just found that as a writer and a scientist, which I am as well, but he has a way of writing which is very, very easy to understand. He writes, he invents a point and justifies it, and it just flows. And you often find yourself reaching the point and getting the point before you even get to it, because you just end up going with the flow of what he's thinking. He expresses himself very, very clearly. So that was when I just basically kind of found out the selfish gene, and that made me think about the world from the basic example that it's in the point of view of a gene, and how that then has effect on life and human beings and all this. So that's pretty good, and he's a good writer, and that's one thing. And obviously, most of us know that was post at the University of Oxford, the Professor of Public Understanding of Science, and that's really where I think he does good things, because he is known for that, he's a public figure for that. And whether you agree with him or disagree with him, he is a figure, maybe himself is a public figure, it's his job to do it, and stimulates a lot of debate and discussion. And you mentioned Richard Dawkins, and you invariably get a reaction. Might not be a good reaction, but you get a reaction. And when you think about atheism these days, you think about Richard Dawkins about atheism too, which enables somebody else to get people thinking about these issues. It's good that there's someone in the public eye who can say, actually, especially in these days when we've got religion, all sorts of problems in society, we've got somebody who makes it to stand up and say, actually, I don't agree with religion. It's not that I don't agree with your religion, it's that I don't agree with any religion. As a concept, it's flawed. And I think that's quite good. It's not the only one who does it. We've got Christian religion, they're all doing it, but I think it's important that people like that are there in this day and age. That it's not everything that's going on in the world isn't a battle between religions. It's not about different religious ideologies, but there's actually a point of view that you can do without the whole thing. And I think it's important that public figures to represent that. And Dawkins is one of them, and I admire him for that. And he works very hard to keep that in the time. And that was about it, except to say he was also a very good friend of Douglas Adams, which gets points in my book, and his wife used to be in Doctor Who, which is in So I'm hand over to you now. So that was the case for why Richard Dawkins is pretty marvellous.
Cheers, Rich. And I would like to welcome Norma to explain why Richard Dawkins is an arrogant, self-righteous idiot.
Well, I think an arrogant, self-righteous idiot isn't really how I describe him. It's a bit of an understatement. Now, I don't have an issue with Richard Dawkins as a person. I think he's an elegant writer. I mean, I like the style that he writes his books in. As Rich alluded to, they are easy to read, they're easy to follow, and they do sort of lead quite nicely to some really good atheist conclusions. However, and this is where sort of me and Richard Dawkins don't get along, is that from the point of view of a scientist, his books aren't scientific. From the point of view of a theologist, or a theologian, his books aren't very theological. From the point of a philosopher, his books aren't very philosophical. So you get this sort of mishmash, this middle ground grey area of sort of pseudo-science, pseudo-theology, and pseudo-philosophy. And in my eyes, sort of Rich sees this as a good thing that you sort of come to these conclusions before you got to the end of any particular sort of arguments sort of string. And I think that's a little misleading. I mean, that's the same sort of idea you're supposed to get from reading the Bible. And you always get the sense in the way that of the personalisation of a lot of the arguments that Richard Dawkins uses, that he's preaching. And from the point of view of an atheist, is I actually find it far more difficult to talk to people once I've read Richard Dawkins than I ever did before they read Richard Dawkins. Because he's got a lot of these throwaway, tossing an argument kind of quotations, kind of ideas that people don't think about. I think if you're going to be a rationalist and you're going to think about things and you're going to try and make your own mind up, which is ultimately what rationalisation is all about, having this sort of ready-made recipe book of how to be an atheist and how to view an atheist religious world kind of defeats that object, because it is so easy to understand and it is so easily accessible to the public. Is you get this idea that people don't have to think for themselves. I dislike as well his constant attack on religion. Although I don't like the idea of religion and I'm sort of against the sort of propagation of religious ideas amongst people in one society, the way he goes about discussing that allows for, and this is where I sort of my main point is, it allows for his critics to get credibility by rebutting him and refuting him. For example, if any of you read the God Delusion, a guy called Alison McGrath wrote a rebuttal to that called the Dawkins Delusion. Now, the Dawkins Delusion is truly the most atrocious critical sort of look at atheism that I've ever read. I mean, it is the epitome of pseudoscience and pseudo-theology. I mean, this is a guy who calls himself a Christian and yet refuses to actually use the Christian arguments in refuting the God Delusion. And if the God Delusion had then been written, Dawkins hadn't put that out there and hadn't allowed this sort of discussion, then people like Alison McGrath would never have got any credibility for their ideas. And it's this pseudoscience and this credibility to pseudoscience and the arguments for God's existence that is the biggest difficulty I face when trying to talk about atheism. And so, although I allow the fact that Dawkins is a clever guy, he was a scientist, he was a zoologist, evolutionary biologist by profession. And he's a half-decent writer. I mean, if he was writing novels, I'm sure those novels would fly off the shelves. I mean, he's a good, elegant, detailed, critical writer. However, I believe he's too close to his own subjects when he writes them. If you've ever read the God Delusion, it's a 400-page document, which is about 8 pages of critical atheism. The rest are personal attacks on pseudoscience, personal attacks on religion, and personal attacks and personal ideas about what atheism should be about. And that isn't what we should be reading when we're reading a text on atheism. I mean, yes, it's not a bad reference, it's got a lot of these throwaway comments. It's really good for quoting, it's really good for quoting, sort of, when you're trying to get a quick atheist message. But if you delve deeper than that, you tend to find that there's no substance behind it. A lot of the sort of the science he uses is questionable at times, and the rest not entirely relevant. For example, his attacks on sort of the paranormal. I mean, although I don't believe in a paranormal activity, the way Dawkins goes about describing how rubbish it is, you draw nothing from his argument apart from that he really dislikes paranormal scientists. The way he talks about it isn't enough to go, actually, paranormal can't exist, there's no logical reason for it to exist. You almost, I mean, when I read his essay on sort of science, his sort of attack on paranormal activity, I almost found myself taking the other people's side. I was actually defending paranormal science against Richard Dawkins because of the way he wrote what he wrote. And the same with God delusion is that I almost want to stick up for religion after reading it. To be honest, he has written some really good. I really like him reading The Rainbow because it's not written as a sort of scientific explanation for everything. It's written as a way of looking at a certain aspect of the world and enjoying it. And he's not pretending that he's talking about sort of theology and science. That's where Richard Dawkins should stick to his work. The Selfish Gene is a book that, for the most part, is a fairly good read. However, you still get this very personalisation of a lot of the arguments, and that's where I struggle with Richard Dawkins. Is he is preaching and he is ranting about religion, and so it's very difficult to objectively take his work and say, yes, I'm going to apply that to a certain sort of idea. So that's basically why I think Richard Dawkins has had a negative effect on atheism and atheist thinking.
Right, cheers for that, Noel. And now we're going to open it up to the floor to make a comment. Stick your hand up and glare and point at you. Okay, go for it.
I was going to say, he's a really nice chap though, if you ever heard him speak. It's just, I agree, that book wasn't a very big book that he wrote, The Dawkins Delusion. It's quite a funny book. I mean, it's about 60 pages long, 60 odd pages long. And he spent most of the time actually establishing that Dawkins' ideas are not that new. I mean, a lot of his attacks on religion are from Sigmund Freud's ideas and Feuerbach. They're all very old school kind of type of debate, I think. And from that point of view, it was quite a level-headed attack. I think he was trying to be as even keel as he could. But he's also, he was a molecular biophysicist before, so he's got the same kind of background as Dawkins, so he's equally qualified to write that sort of book. I just think it's still curious why Dawkins spends 400 pages, as you said, discussing something that doesn't exist, you know? It's just like, I think he's just reaching out. I think he's like, maybe, atheism, I don't know, I mean, you're talking about an awful lot about God, and if he doesn't exist, why bother? It's like...
Well, because I think yes, it has a problem, with the effect that religion has on our society, so it's not, I mean, I agree with you, a lot of the ideas in the God delusion are quite old, but I think there was a gap in the market, and there seems to be, and it's been a good seller, for a book that was written for the general public, not a philosophy book, not a textbook, a book for the general public summarising all the ideas that atheism consists of in one place, where people could read it, it's accessible, and it's written in reasonable language that you don't have to be a scientist to read it, or a philosopher, and I think there was a gap there for that, and suddenly people are rushing to fill it over Christopher Hitchens' has written a simple book, people are asking us questions, and there's a market there for it at the moment. How long that will last, I don't know, but I think his job is professor of public understanding of science. Now, whether that strays into theology or whether we should take that as a mention, I don't know. I mean, it was a very personal motivation.
Make the pseudo scientific statements, isn't it?
The problem is Dawkins making the same level of pseudoscience in a lot of his work. I'm going to be reading a lot of the ideas today counter argument. For example, the argument about the beginning of the universe, that if there was a creator, there must have been a creator of the creator, and a creator of the creator of the creator, is that his argument for that relies on you allowing for the fact that there was a creator in the first place. And so he uses his own argument to prove his own argument. And that happens quite a few of his things. He assumes truth to prove the assumption. And that's just about science.
It's like the Boeing 747, isn't it? Like, for example, he talks about the complexity, the likelihood of our being here is something like the world will go into a scrapyard and come out with a Boeing 747. And he says if God did that, well, God is the ultimate Boeing 717. But that is, in itself, as you say, is definitely a circular argument because, there's no correlation there between absolute improbability and existence. We clearly exist, we're improbable. why would you then say, but God is even more improbable, and therefore he doesn't exist? But that's not fair, because you've already established no correlation between improbability and existence.
No, but that's because someone else argued that we are so improbable that we couldn't have existed without God.
Yeah.
That's the counter-argument, that we are dependent upon God existing. Dawkins is saying, yes, we are improbable,
Yeah.
but we exist.
But God is improbable.
But there's no need. But God is improbable. There's no need for. Yeah, it's kind of like saying. It is a circular thing. I can see what he means. You can't argue that it is equally flawed. Let's put it that way. It's equally flawed to argue that we are so improbable there must be a designer, and then expect the designer to be as improbable or more improbable than us, but not expect the designer to have a designer. That's flawed as well. I think because it goes in circles both sides.
It's a reverse on